So this is my daily live stream of my daily routine, meditation, yoga, and martial arts. I'm going to be playing some communist literature from the Revolutionary Communists of America in the background. And please like, share, and subscribe. Check out my GoFundMe. It would help me a lot. Because I am between jobs right now. I just had a few interviews this week. I have a few more interviews. But any of your support will help me a lot to be able to keep doing this. I'm a sustaining member of the Revolutionary Communists of America. I'm a YPG, International Combat Veteran. I am a 6-time gold medal jiu-jitsu champion and a certified yoga teacher. And I'm going to clean up this room and then get ready for the meditation. We'll be listening to some video about philosophy during meditation.
Capitalism today is suffering and despair alongside the most wealth and technology that we have ever known. That wealth and technology is in the hands of a tiny minority who live like parasites off of the rest of us, the working class, the people they exploit.
The Republican and Democratic parties represent the interests of the capitalist class and can never represent the interests of the working class. These parties cannot serve two masters. The workers will be squeezed more and more and will be forced to make hard sacrifices while the capitalists will fatten their pockets, whether it's Trump or it's Harris in the White House.
You see why both parties are here. Over the last decade, the richest 1% has captured 54% of global wealth. They have a record fortune of $44 trillion.
No matter who wins this election in November, the working class will ultimately lose, as billions will continue to be sent abroad to support the genocide of the Palestinians and a proxy war in Ukraine, while the 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. 92% of Americans can't even afford a one-bedroom apartment.
Over 100 million people in the richest country on earth cannot afford their health care. Wages have stagnated for half a century. This is the reason that 69% of voters say that the entire U.S. political and economic system needs major changes or to be torn down entirely. The working class is right to be angry. They're right to want to fight. They're right to hate the establishment, to hate the status quo.
That's why we say no to both of these capitalist parties, and we think it's about time that the workers have their own party.
Please stand up, comrades. Everybody, stand up, please. All in favor of launching the Revolutionary Communists of America, please raise your hands. Well, comrades, you are all officially founding members of the RCA.
A sea of red flags marching down the street of a major American city. We just gave the world a glimpse into the future of the political landscape of this country, because the communist movement is just getting started.
Here, the belly of the beast, we have a duty to our class of brothers and sisters around the world to finally overthrow the biggest threat to the world revolution, the American bourgeoisie.
Todos los trabajadores de Latinoamérica hemos sufrido por los intereses del imperialismo estadounidense. En nombre de la democracia se han masacrado a nuestros pueblos, han financiado golpes de Estado, han establecido dictaduras militares que han asesinado y han desaparecido a miles de trabajadores, y en México son cómplices de la violencia que existe con el narcotráfico, y resistimos y luchamos.
The enemy of the Trump voting working class is not the workers that were born in another country who speak a different language. The enemy of the working class is sitting in executive boardrooms watching us from their skyscrapers and rubbing their hands together when they see one section of the working class channeling its discontent against another section of the working class. They want to stoke the culture war because they know that it benefits their interests.
This country was built on racism and oppression. It is in the veins of capitalism. But we will achieve genuine reparations for centuries of slavery and centuries of colonialism by expropriating the capitalists and building socialism. There will be no more border walls, no more mass incarceration.
It's time for the communists to explain that the class war alone is the underlying conflict in this society. That the working class and the capitalist class have nothing in common. It's time for the communist generation to tap into the anger in society and channel it against its genuine enemy, the capitalist system, the capitalist class.
It is the working class that makes the hospitals, the schools, the buses function. We make the world run. The capitalists, the billionaires, the CEOs, they need us, but we do not need them. Expropriate the banks. Expropriate the monopolies. And on the basis of a government of the working class, we will transform society. We will cut the working week in half with no loss in pay, with full employment and education for all. We can get to work actually improving society. We will build hospitals, schools, public transportation. Everyone will have access to quality, affordable health care. And we are going to confront the climate catastrophe head on. We are fighting for our future, for the future of all of humanity.
These red flags and this hammer and sickle stands for a world that is ruled by the working class. A world where nobody has to sleep on the streets. Where life is more than just working yourself to death, grinding through a miserable existence until you drop. We stand for a world of abundance. A world that's waiting to be born. We are America's communist generation. We are America's working class. And we will overthrow capitalism in our lifetime.
Republicans, build a communist party, and let's build the revolutionary communists of America.
It is not uncommon to encounter skepticism or even extreme pessimism about the possibility of a socialist revolution in the United States of America. We hear things like, I agree that we need a socialist revolution, but that's never going to happen in America. Or, isn't the American working class too privileged to revolt? Given decades of ideological onslaught against communism and socialism in schools and in the media, and the effects of the post-World War II economic boom, which temporarily blunted class consciousness for an entire historical period, it is easy to assume that the US will remain capitalist forever. But the tide is now turning, and it must be emphasized that even the most powerful imperialist power on earth is not immune to the laws of the class struggle. Throughout history, revolutions have exploded in what seemed to be the most unlikely places. In 2011, the Arab Spring started in Tunisia, which only a few months earlier had been deemed a model country by US imperialism. In 1978, the CIA considered Iran as the most stable country in the Middle East, not long before the Shah was overthrown in the 1979 Iranian Revolution. And let us not forget that prior to the 1917 Russian Revolution, the first time the working class took power and began the socialist transformation of society, the Tsarist Empire was viewed by almost everyone as an utterly conservative and reactionary society. But it isn't just the poorer ex-colonial or semi-colonial countries that are prone to revolution. The German revolutions in 1918 and 1923 and the British General Strike in 1926 show us that even in the economic powerhouses of capitalism, the contradictions of capitalism cannot be fundamentally overcome. In fact, in 1968, the largest revolutionary general strike in history shook France. This was a country that had been lauded for its high living standards, and it occurred during a period of economic upswing. All of this goes to show that it is not the absolute level of want or poverty that makes a revolution, but rather the constant instability of the system, which eventually pushes the masses of workers to realize that they need to take matters into their own hands. For Marxists, This is the essence of a revolutionary situation. Revolutions are an objective phenomena under class society. They develop according to their own laws and occur independently of the will of any individual or even of society as a whole. Just as we can confidently say that earthquakes will erupt due to the constant motion of the tectonic plates, history proves that revolutions are an inevitable result of a society divided into opposing classes. While we can't predict the exact time and location of earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, or revolutions, we can be sure that they are coming. Still, some argue that the US, with its advanced military and home to the richest people on Earth, is a unique beast. Surely this must be a special case, but this is ultimately just an inverse reflection of American exceptionalism. The idea that the US is somehow unique and fundamentally different from all other countries or civilizations. While it is easy for radical youth to reject the notion that the US is the best, it is ultimately the same kind of logic to argue that the US working class is uniquely inert and reactionary, or that communism is uniquely alien to American shores. In fact, communism and class struggle have a long and heroic history in the US, and the American working class has militant and revolutionary traditions. From the 1776 Revolution to the Revolutionary War to overthrow slavery in the 1860s, to the rise of the industrial working class and the building of the American labor movement, class struggle has deep roots in this country. And if all that were not enough, we should bear in mind that consciousness changes over time and is deeply impacted by events. According to a 2023 poll, 11% of the population, over 28 million adults, believe that communism is the ideal economic system. This means that a large swath of Americans are already communists. The broad trajectory of US period gives us a sense of where things are headed. The 2008 economic crisis, the 2011 Occupy movement, BLM, the rise and fall of Bernie Sanders and the DSA, the recent uptick in labor actions and unionization campaigns, the pandemic and the 2020 economic crisis, and above all, the monumental 2020 George Floyd uprising show us that economic and political instability, and above all, the class struggle, are on the rise. Even greater events are in our future. The question is not, will revolution happen, but rather, when, and will we be prepared? This is what motivates the American communists to carry out our most pressing task, to build a revolutionary party capable of uniting the working class in a struggle to carry through the American Socialist Revolution. Once US capitalism is overthrown, the final victory of the world socialist revolution will be squarely on the agenda. If you are a communist, then get organized with Socialist Revolution, the American section of the International Marxist Tendency.
We're going to sit for 30 minutes, then we're going to do 30 minutes of yoga, 30 minutes of martial arts solo drills. Today will be a relatively easy day. So get comfortable, get your seat, get some water. Just looking for a good one to start off with.
Yeah, we are poor because they are rich. I really like this slogan, but I think it needs some explaining. It needs a bit more emphasis on why this is. And that's kind of my hope for today. And I think, honestly, it's because life for the average person today, it feels like this absurd comedy, you know, where everybody else is in on the bit except for you. The moment you leave your house, sometimes before that even happens, tens, sometimes hundreds of hands appear out of nowhere, and they're demanding your money for rent, for groceries, for your cell phone and internet, for tips, for bullshit fees, and car insurance. We work all week and then are forced to divvy up our measly paychecks into these mysterious hands, and we watch it disappear into the ether. And each month, each year, it gets harder just to keep our heads above water. And according to a new H&R Block survey, 85% of Canadians feel that living paycheck to paycheck is the new norm. Another 51% say it's hard to make ends meet. And in Edmonton, the average cost of living for a single person is about $2,900 per month, all in. At minimum wage, you'd be short $700 a month, unless you got roommates or a second job. And part of this is because the cost of basic necessities has skyrocketed. You don't really need me to tell you this. And this is felt most heavily by ordinary people like us, the students and the workers. In the last 5 years, groceries have gotten 30% more expensive and are expected to rise another 5% this year. Buying a home has become a total pipe dream, so we're confined to rent at extortionate prices. It's becoming impossible not to feel the squeeze. For those fortunate enough to have a job, we are barely scraping by. And even worse, more and more people are facing unemployment. Just last month, it was announced that 6.9% of people in Canada are unemployed. And among students, this rises to 20%, nearly 1 in 5 people, which is actually the worst in decades. And you hear stories about Canadian youth applying to hundreds, sometimes thousands of jobs and are still unsuccessful. Often that's because you get an AI to write your job application, and then you submit that to an AI who reads your job application, and I guess all this is to say that AI doesn't want to hire itself. Even worse, 1/5 of people are skipping meals, while more than 2 million people per month, more than ever before, are relying on food banks. About 10% of Canadians live below the poverty line, while tent cities and homelessness have become a core feature of every city across the country. The future looks bleak, and the present is dreadful. And so I think facing all of this, it's obvious that something has gone wrong. Millions of ordinary people are struggling and suffering just to survive. Meanwhile, the rich live in lavish luxury. There are so many stories about people like Bezos spending unfathomable amounts of money on ridiculous bullshit like yachts and stuff. First, there was the infamous all-female space flight, where for 10 minutes, millionaire and billionaire women, including noted astrophysicist Katy Perry, went on a casual space jaunt. And while the exact cost wasn't made public, space tourism, even for suborbital flights, where they don't actually break out of the atmosphere, like Dr. Perry's, cost tens of millions of dollars. And even worse, those 10 minutes in space made more pollution than the poorest 1 billion people will in their entire lifetimes. And not content with demonstrating that the billionaires love burning money just for the fuck of it, Bezos then rented out Venice for 3 days for his wedding in June. It's estimated that the wedding cost $60 million. That's actually the equivalent of 37 Amazon warehouse workers' lifetime wages. But this is just a drop in the bucket of Bezos' multi-trillion-dollar empire. And really what we're seeing is that these billionaires are concentrating an enormous amount of wealth in their hands. The richest 1% made $42 million an hour last year. How much did you guys make? I see a lot of zeros, ones. I don't know how you made $1 an hour. Even worse, 4 new billionaires were being minted per week across the world. In Canada alone, billionaire wealth increased by $309 million per day. Actually, the money held by Canadian billionaires could carpet Vancouver in $50 bills. This is the kind of money that they have. For Canadian workers, real wages, which is just the money you make minus inflation at the same time, we're only making about $40 more than we were 10 years ago. That's nothing. That barely gets you dinner these days. And since the 1980s, real wages have only grown 20%. That's $200 per week for the average worker over nearly 60 years. For the billionaires, however, things are a little bit nicer. In the last 40 years, their wealth increased by 20,000%, from $83 billion in 1987, when Forbes first started tracking billionaires, to a whopping $16.1 trillion this year. I had a hard time trying to figure out how to show everybody this amount of wealth. I found that there's this website where you can scroll, and actually, if you just let your computer scroll, it will take an hour to get through all of the billionaires' wealth, if $1 million is 1 pixel. But the actual closest number I found was $16 trillion is about the same amount of dollars as a child has cells. I don't know what to say beyond that. The rich keep getting richer, and this gap is growing wider. But like I said at the beginning, the point of today isn't just to tell you how bad this system is. That we are poor because they are rich is indisputable. Everybody knows that the system is built to enrich the wealthy and the powerful. There's this deep anger and a real hatred of the status quo. But if we want to convince people of the need to overthrow capitalism, we have to go beyond moral arguments. And really, all of the lies about hard work, taking risks, or creating jobs that we hear are illusions that obscure the realities of the system. We need to explain that capitalism is built on the exploitation of the workers. And more importantly, exploitation and inequality and the things that we see, they're not the result of cheating, force, or might. This inequality is the product of the laws and logic of the capitalist system itself. Once set in motion, this exploitation and inequality become an inevitable tendency, and it cannot be reformed away. And so despite the claims of the ruling class and their apologists here in the universities and their assholes in suits in the government, these laws have not existed for all eternity. Capitalism is just one of several modes of production in the history of human society. Even the division of society into different classes, slave and slave owner, lord and serf, now worker and capitalist, are relatively recent in this vast history of humanity. Before class society, humanity was organized into tribal communities where the means of production, basically the things we require to feed and clothe ourselves, were held in common. And so I think this poses the question, how did these largely egalitarian societies where wealth was held in common and built on cooperation lead to this vicious cycle of inequality where the capitalists end up at the top? I think for those of us who were bold enough to ask the question to our unsuspecting parents, teachers, or professors, we're often told it's the product of human nature. And this means that some people are intelligent, they're risk takers and go-getters, while the rest are lazy and live beyond their means. And so because of this, the first type of person becomes wealthy, while the second are forced to sell their own skins to survive. And so the working class, we have to accept we're condemned to this lifetime of misery because our ancestors were frivolous and lazy. The poor are to blame for being poor. How many times have we heard that before? But the rise of capitalism and the capitalists was anything but peaceful or natural. It's a well-known fact that conquest, slavery, robbery, and murder played a central role in the establishment of capitalism. And so, I think we have to ask the question, what is capitalism? Capitalism revolves around commodity production, that is, to produce goods and services explicitly to sell them. Commodities existed before capitalism, but under this system, it becomes generalized and it infiltrates into every single aspect of life. But before capitalist relations emerged, things were not made explicitly to be sold. You can imagine a peasant living in feudal society. He might have produced more grain or cloth or tools than he needed himself. And so he could trade these things for other stuff that he didn't have. The key difference being that the peasant produced these things because they were useful to him. For the modern capitalist, they produce these items to sell them so that they can make a profit. Under capitalism, commodity production requires capital, which is really just money that makes more money. It's their factories, the land, the tools, all of these things that the capitalists own. But not all money or wealth is necessarily capital, right? We've all got money here today, but I don't see any capitalists in the room. At least I hope not. And so what does it actually require? This transformation of money into capital, which is really the basis of capitalist relations, relies on a unique commodity, the commodity of labor power. And this commodity didn't emerge until a class of workers were born. And so therefore, for capitalist relations to take hold, not only is there a need for capitalists with their wealth accumulated through the conquest and plunder of the colonies, but it also demands turning the former serfs, peasants, and artisans into workers. It needed to strip them of their land and tools and turn them into a class of people who were deprived of everything. Previously, these things had guaranteed their existence for generations, but now they were left with nothing but their ability to work for somebody else. In England, for example, this occurred through the enclosure movement during the 15th and 16th century. And there was this widespread eviction of the peasants and the serfs from the farmlands. And their homesteads were destroyed, burned down, and people who resisted were murdered. And I think the question is why? they were displaced by the landlords in favor of sheep. Sheep. And this is because, at the time, there was an enormous demand for wool with the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution. And this meant it was far more profitable to have sheep occupy these lands than people. And in doing so, the poor common folk were displaced from the villages and forced into the arms of the early capitalists. They happily began exploiting this layer. And they even argued that these workers came to them looking for jobs of their own free will. And so just to give you a bit of an anecdote, Thomas More, a British lord who described this process happening in his famous book, Utopia, some of you might know it, and it illustrated the evils that were running rampant throughout 16th century Britain. And he says, it's a bit long, I apologize, but I think you'll like it. One covetous and insatiable cormorant, which is to mean the landlord, very plague of his native country, may enclose many thousands acres of land together. The husbandmen be thrust out of their own, either by cunning and fraud, or by violence and oppression, or by wrongs and injuries, that they may be compelled to sell all, either by hook or crook. They must depart away, poor, silly, wretched souls, men, women, husbands, wives, children, and whole households. This was state-sanctioned robbery and violence against a vast layer of society. It turned formerly self-sufficient farmers into landless, destitute workers who were forced into the cities to get work. There, children as young as 5 or 6 were working the same shifts as adults in the mines and the factories. And the result was generations of working-class children who received little to no education, were paid starvation wages, given horrible diseases and early deaths in exchange. Why? Because children were cheaper to employ than men and women. Children could also be more easily bullied and beaten into submission by the bosses. For these working class families, sending their children into the workplace was the only way to survive. This is the reality of capitalism's origins, and while the oppression has been concealed since then, it is no less exploitative or real. And I think this is important because today, the capitalist politicians and academics, they have no hesitations about labeling Marxists as these bloodthirsty maniacs because we want revolutionary change in society. And they equate revolution with violence, or murder and anarchy. And yet in the face of violence necessary to establish capitalism, they retain a stoical peace of mind, to quote Marx. And while accusing us, these apologists of capitalism forget their very own violent past. And so, by the time of the 17th and the 18th century, the capitalist class had become economically dominant across several European countries, but they were hemmed in by the feudal aristocracy and monarchy. Their heavy taxation and unproductive spending on luxuries had become an obstacle to the development of society and production. And this produced the bourgeois revolutions in England during the 1640s and the Great French Revolution of 1789. And here, capitalism begins to carry out its historic role, to do away with the obstacle of feudalism and convert this scattered, personal production into capitalist private property and mass production. And since its establishment in Europe, it spread across the globe and became the dominant mode of production on Earth. And like all modes of production, from slave societies to feudalism and capitalism today, they come onto the scene of history as a necessary part of humanity's development. And it allows for this leap in production, developing science, culture, industry, agriculture, and technology, all of these things. But then once established, the laws of capitalist competition act to concentrate and centralize these productive forces in society. It leads to the creation of monopolies and the multinational corporations that we see that dominate every single aspect of our lives. This production for self-consumption is done away with. A strict division of labor is implemented. The economies of each country are brought together in the world market with supply chains that span the entire globe. And all of this is done for the sake of increased efficiency and productivity, which is ultimately to increase profits. And this reinvestment of money back into production as capital is what allowed this system to displace feudalism in the first place. But now this is all being turned on its head as capitalism begins to drag society backwards. And so, I don't know about you guys, but anytime I talk to somebody about communism and the need for revolution, they tell me, but capitalism is the system of freedom and choice. But for those of us on Earth, we know that this is a total lie. We have the freedom to be exploited by our choice of bosses, so we can survive. We can choose from a variety of brands at the grocery store, where 80% of our grocery items are controlled by 4 or fewer brands. You can pick a cell phone plan from Bell, Telus, or Rogers, who control 90% of the telecom market in Canada. You could fly to a different country, but the plane you fly on will undoubtedly be a Boeing or an Airbus. Undoubtedly, you hold your money in one of the big 5 banks who control 90% of financial services in Canada. And finally, when you actually do decide to buy something, these transactions are all handled by Visa or MasterCard, who dominate 92% of the $27 trillion payment processing industry. These will happily bury you 6 feet under, where 82% of coffins are made by one of 2 firms. It gets a little morbid, but that's the truth. This is the system we live under. And it's not a new tendency either, because back at the beginning of the 20th century, J.P. Morgan, the Wall Street kingpin, he used every economic crisis to snap up failing banks and businesses, ultimately to centralize power and wealth into his hands. More recently, J.P. Morgan Chase, yes, the same one, bought up several more banks. They got Chase in the meantime. Then they bought Credit Suisse after the collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank a couple of years ago. And now today, J.P. Morgan Chase controls $3.5 trillion in assets around the world. And that sounds like a big number until you compare it to BlackRock, the world's largest investment firm, who controls more than $11 trillion in investments. Capitalism is built on the rich getting richer. And Lenin recognized this tendency of capitalism towards monopolies, and he wrote his famous book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, right at the same time. Lenin explains that the logic of capitalism made these monopolies inevitable. And this is echoed by a famous saying, I think is very popular in computer science, that a system does what it is intended to do. And so why should we expect different results when the chase for profit motivates everything? And yes, strictly speaking, I know if anybody took an Econ 101 class this week, you know that in bourgeois economics they call these duopolies or oligopolies. But what difference does it make in reality? The big banks have consolidated so much power and money that they direct investment around the economy. They own controlling shares of many major corporations. Actually, there was a study that showed that these gigantic engage in what the study called horizontal shareholding, which is where they control significant stakes in competing companies within the same industry. Which, said more simply, is that even when there's this illusion of competition within a sector, it is likely that a small group of billionaires and bankers are pulling the strings behind the scenes. Where's the billionaires and bankers behind the scenes there? And so, yeah, this is no conspiracy, but an objective fact that is recognized by millions of people. The rich work together to keep themselves at the top. And so, yeah, I think sometimes you'll hear again that this isn't capitalism anymore. So are we sure this is still capitalism? And we hear all kinds of arguments to defend this system as it is. We're told that small is beautiful, or that this isn't real capitalism anymore. Instead, we live under corporatism, crony capitalism, or a number of other weird and wonderful things. They argue that government intervention and corruption have created what we're witnessing. The truth is, capitalism means big. Big pharma, big oil, big tech, big AI. In sector after sector, thanks to these crises and downturns, the big win out and buy up the small through mergers and acquisitions, and it concentrates the market further. The corruption, the control over the government, and all the other controversies we see are a product of capitalism's laws. This economic power has provided the capitalist class with overwhelming political power. Profit rules the world. And so for these defenders of capitalism, their solution is to try and turn back time, to call for greater competition, for freer markets, or to try and break up the monopolies through antitrust laws and regulations. Or they call for protectionism and economic nationalism, make America great again, in the hope to fight back against these multinational corporations by buying local, buying Canadian, putting our elbows up, and promoting home industry. The truth is, all of these suggestions are completely utopian. Monopolies came into existence because they are more efficient and more productive, meaning profitable. They were the ones that organized production across the globe with this complex web of supply chains. Capitalism developed these connections precisely because they allowed for advancements in production. To try and disband these monopolies is to suggest returning to lower levels of economic development, basically making us poorer. There is no going back from here. Thank you. But under the control of the working class, This immense organization could be used to produce exactly what we need. Companies like Walmart or Amazon, for example, they have this extraordinary amount of planning running behind the scenes to keep things going. And this is to ensure that their warehouses are kept full and shelves are constantly stocked, ready to be shipped anywhere in the world. Actually, the sales are predicted so accurately at Walmart that as you take something off the shelf, that item is already coming from the warehouse to put it back. This is how much knowledge we have of what is needed in society. But left to the capitalists, all this potential is wasted. And on the other hand, it's become very trendy to blame these problems on price gouging and greedflation. And this is basically to say that the corporations increase the price of things to scrape extra money out of people's pockets when hard times hit. And usually this follows from the idea of corporate greed, that these big businesses are earning more than their fair share. And we can look at this recent bread fixing scandal with Loblaws. And literally, the Canadian bosses were working together for at least 14 years to make it harder for us to get bread. No, okay. Really, the gang of Loblaws, Sobeys, Metro, and Walmart were all working together to ensure bread stayed profitable. The price of bread rose by 96% compared to 45% for all other foods. And certainly, these monopolies profit from their position and work together to protect their bread. And it should be no shock that they are looking to screw us over for every single dollar. But according to the laws of capitalist competition, if they raise prices, a competitor should undercut them to take their share. And you actually hear this complaint from small business owners that they just can't pass on all of these extra costs from inflation and fuel and everything else onto their consumers without losing sales. If they do that, their customers will go to the big corporations who benefit from economies of scale and can offer these products more cheaply and actually take that loss if necessary. And what this does is it allows the multinationals and monopolies to make extra profits during times of crisis through price fixing and these backroom deals. But these extra profits ultimately draw other capitalists in and it pushes the price back down to normal. So certainly, greedflation is a real phenomenon, but it doesn't really explain anything. In fact, it actually obscures reality, and it suggests that the system could be fixed by convincing the capitalists to be less greedy. The capitalists that have risen to the top, like Walmart, Apple, United Health, and Google, they got there by being more ruthless and cutthroat than the rest. They put bread, profits, above all else. But I think this forces us to ask, where do the profits actually come from under capitalism? And so we know that these capitalists have to sell their commodities to make profits, but that they generally can't sell them for more than they're worth. We buy and sell things that appear equal in value, but if this were true, then no profit would get made. So where is it? It's hiding in this special commodity that only the capitalists can purchase, our labor power, our ability to work. We as the working class sell our lives bit by bit to the capitalists, where we spend our days creating value for them. We are paid back wages, but these wages cannot be equal to the total value we create while we're at work. Otherwise, the capitalists wouldn't profit. And in fact, our wages represent the bare minimum to keep the average worker alive and coming back to work. And the only reason the capitalists can do this is because they own everything. What choice do we have under this system but to go to work each day to try and survive? But it doesn't have to be this way. A new system is clearly necessary, but it's crucial that we understand what we're up against. So this brings me to the ruling class, because under this system, the capitalists control everything about how and when production happens. They own everything, so they control everything. To protect such a system and to prevent the workers from fighting back, the capitalists have built a powerful state apparatus and its institutions all designed to serve their interests. This state is the government, the laws, the army, police, and the justice system. These are the armed bodies of men defending capitalism. And we see this when a worker steps out of line and steals food to feed their family. They can expect fines, or they can go to jail. But if the billionaires steal piles of money through insider trading, fraud, or tax evasion, it usually goes unpunished. It's estimated that between $250 billion up to $1 trillion occurs due to white-collar crimes in the US alone. And at best, sometimes the most egregious crimes are punished, if only to maintain this illusion of equality before the law. And I think it's important to recognize that the state isn't something imposed onto society. It's not something that just came from nowhere. It's a product of class society itself. It's an admission that society, that humans living together have been split into antagonistic classes that have competing economic interests that can't be reconciled. And so for this reason, the ruling class is compelled to have this kind of judge that's supposed to be neutral sitting at the top of society. And the fundamental truth is that every state must serve the interests of one class in society. Under capitalism, it is the capitalist class who rules because of their role in controlling production. And I think the illusion that such a state could be reformed to be kinder and fairer or to revert back to previous eras of capitalism misunderstands its role in society. So long as the ruling class maintains its economic power, it will utilize the state to repress and hold back the oppressed classes. They must prevent us from rising up and challenging this system in any way they can. And we saw this very recently. Anytime the workers dare to fight back through strikes or demonstrations, and the most recent example is the Air Canada flight attendant strike. Some of you might have seen this, but when the Air Canada CEO was being interviewed on TV, he said, well, we thought obviously that Section 107 would be enforced. Basically, he's saying, we thought the government was going to do its job and send them the fuck back to work. This law has been enforced by the Liberals 8 times over the last 2 years. Why should he have expected any differently? And so ultimately, these laws and the system that upholds them are dependent on a struggle between the classes, between the workers and the capitalists for us. And I think the fight of the flight attendants showed the way forward. When they were forced back to work, they showed who really makes Air Canada run. And it ain't the CEO. The only way to make genuine improvements in our lives is to fight for them with courageous, militant class struggle tactics like work stoppages, like the Air Canada strike, and generalizing them, bringing them to every worker, to every industry in society. And really the need for class struggle is only becoming more necessary as time goes on. Since the end of the post-war boom, the capitalists have relentlessly attacked the working class. As the boom dried up and profit margins shrunk, they ruthlessly cut wages and attacked our living conditions to claw back what they had previously given. And they could not have done this alone. They relied on the government to do it for them. For decades, the norm has been to cut social services like healthcare and education, while corporations get tax cuts and bailouts. Every time there's a crisis, the corporations look to the state to save their skin. And ultimately, the state relies on the economic wealth of the capitalists, so they happily oblige in crisis after crisis. And really what we're seeing is that the profound contradictions of capitalism are revealed time and time again through each of these crises that we face. We, as the working class, create all wealth in society. Without our work extracting the oil, building the houses, stocking the shelves, nothing would get done. And this is why every effort is made by the capitalists to force us back to work or to hire scabs to take our place when we go on strike. Without the workers, no profits get made. And under capitalism, the means of production, the places that we go to work, all of the things that we need to create what we need to survive are owned privately by the bosses. And so this value we create is taken and they sell it off. And from all this wealth we create, we are paid back only crumbs in the form of our wage. And it's not just a problem of the workers not being paid enough, although I do want everyone to be paid better. In this system of production for profit, the working class as a whole can never afford to buy back all of the things that we produce. You can imagine that we bake the pie, but we are only given a small slice back. And what does this do? This creates excess commodities that the capitalists can't sell. And if these commodities aren't sold, the capitalists don't make their profits from them. And to survive, these excess commodities have to be sold off at any price to try and recover their money. And this is why corporations like H&M produce millions of clothing items each year, despite 1/3 of it never getting worn and then ending up in landfills in Chile and Southeast Asia. It ends up in landfills across the globe. And so what we do is we produce far too much, and yet there are still people who go without. Why? Because giving these clothes and excess commodities to the people who actually need them is not profitable. This is the logic of capitalism. And so this production, this accumulation of commodities that can't be sold profitably is called a crisis of overproduction, a crisis of too much. And when they can't sell these commodities, they're left to rot. It's like frozen money tied up in shelves and warehouses. And without money, they can't invest back into production. Production grinds to a halt, There are mass layoffs and factory closures until the crisis is dealt with, and we feel this most heavily. I think that should be good. And so to overcome this crisis, the capitalists have three options. However, each one just kicks the can further down the road, preparing a bigger crisis. They can expand into new markets, for one. They can expand the credit system by diving deeper into debt through state spending and loans from the banks. Or they can squeeze more out of the working class by making us work for longer and work harder for less wages. Unfortunately for the capitalists of today, they have exhausted most of their options. On the first one, there are no consumers waiting in this uncharted part of the globe to buy Labubus and iPhones. The capitalists have already been attacking our living standards for decades, and every attack provokes social unrest among the workers. And before this, the capitalists have relied on going into debt to stabilize this system. And now we see that it's reaching the limits of credit with the massive debt crisis we're facing. Really, this is expressing the system reaching its limits. Worldwide debt is nearly equal to world GDP. What this means in simple terms is that every single worker on Earth would have to work for an entire year without getting paid to try and pay back all of this debt. It's impossible. And really, most of this debt was accumulated in just the last 30 years. First, during 2008, with the bank bailouts and the massive mortgage crisis, and then again during COVID. And this really exhausted the capitalist reserves. They don't have the money to do this, and it put them into this debt that we see today. And so when capitalism was still dragging society forward, hundreds of years ago, even 70, 80 years ago, this debt was able to kind of soothe its problems. But today, it only aggravates the disease. And so what this has done is placed the capitalists in a blind alley. Before, they could reinvest some of this surplus into production to grow the economy so they could pay back these debts eventually, right? And just kind of robbing Peter to pay the future Paul. But every new investment now only provokes further overproduction. The constant austerity and attacks on our living standards have driven down consumption. And so the only way left for them is to claw back the living standards of the workers and claw back my banner, to claw back the living standards of the workers. And what this will do will ignite the dynamite lying within the foundations of capitalism. What we see is that world production has outgrown the limits of private property in these individual nation states. The system has reached its limits. The capitalists cannot develop society any further. And I think the most obvious example of this is in what's called falling labor productivity. If you read the news, they're talking about this a lot. They never really get it right. But labor productivity is essentially the amount of economic output per hour worked. And this has been the foundation of society. We have to work to keep ourselves alive, right? Whether it was with primitive tools and scavenging for food, to having to work our job at Starbucks or McDonald's to pay our student loans. But now, for the first time since the Great Depression, Canada's labor productivity began decreasing in 2024. What this means is that every hour of work in Canada now produces less value than it did a year ago. The capitalists can't reinvest back into production because it's less and less profitable. So they're hoarding this money or they use it to speculate. And so we're working harder than ever, but producing less wealth for us. And in Alberta, I think this is felt most heavily and obviously in the oil and gas industry. At the end of the last boom in 2014, the oil barons were pouring massive amounts of money into the province, to the tune of $80 billion. Now it's just $30 billion. And this is despite the oil barons making record profits in the last 5 years. There has never been more oil wealth generated in Alberta, and yet none of this is resulting in better wages or jobs. All of this extra profit is going into stock buybacks and paying dividends. And similar stories are happening in most industries across the country and across the world. And so what we see is that in the hands of the billionaires, all the technology and industry and wealth of society are just a means to line the pockets of their friends, shareholders, and selves. And so this begs the question, what is the solution? And so as long as our labor continues to enrich the capitalists and not ourselves, their wealth will expand while we get poorer. And this is why the communists fight to end the capitalist system. As Marx explains, capitalism creates the conditions for its own destruction. Every measure they take to overcome the current crisis only kicks the can further down the road. This relentless drive for profit means production has grown enormously. There's more than enough wealth to meet everyone's needs. Total wealth in Canada is equal to $19.1 trillion. That's like 1/10 of a child in sales, if you were remembering from earlier, or about $460,000 per person. That's more than enough to guarantee a good standard of living. That pays for your tuition, a down payment on a pretty nice house, and a dignified life more than anything. But we have to take this wealth for ourselves. We already create it, but it is stolen, expropriated from us each hour and day. Under workers' control, the economy could be democratically planned on the basis of need, not profit. All of the existing monopolies, the commanding heights of the economy, must be nationalized without compensation and brought under public ownership to guarantee workers' control. In every workplace, rather than the management of the bosses who act as pit bulls for profit, managers would be elected through democratic vote with the right to recall. This would mean the workers having every right to choose the managers who are best for the job and to replace them when they fail. And with production under workers' control, the masses of people who are left unemployed and destitute could be brought into work to reduce the working day for all. Under capitalism, the bosses are constantly trying to lengthen the working day and squeeze us for maximum profits. By utilizing all the technology combined with the massive strength of the working class, the working week could be reduced down to 20 hours immediately. Every further advancement of technology and industry under workers' control would reduce it further. And after all, once enough clothing, food, and homes, and all the goods that we need and like are produced, there's no reason to keep all these factories running unless it is for profit. And with significantly more free time, the workers would be free to spend their lives pursuing education, culture, hobbies, and personal development. And along with this, the elected representatives of our workplaces would form workers' councils, where political debates and the direction of society could finally be determined by us, and not some guy in an office in Ottawa or at the legislature downtown. God, I hate that place. Excuse me. And so gone are the days of leaving every decision of our lives up to people in suits who see us as numbers on spreadsheets. And finally, an end could be put to this animal-like existence of humanity where we're forced to compete against each other for the scraps and crumbs that the capitalists leave us. The immense organization and planning that has been created by capitalism can be put under the collective ownership and conscious democratic control of the working class. But this transition will not happen automatically. As long as the capitalist system remains, the incredible potential of modern technology and planning will be squandered. Worse, it will be used as the destructive force that breeds the wars, climate catastrophe, and misery that pervades all of our lives. To seize this wealth, we need a socialist revolution. The masses of people who previously sat silent, leaving things to the politicians and businessmen, finally stand up. We take to the streets and make our voices heard. To do so, the working class must organize and mobilize. A revolution will come, and it will happen in Canada. We just don't know when it will happen yet, but it's coming. And so we'll see that only through class struggle, by using our collective power as the working class and shutting down production, can we end this system once and for all and finally make society for us. Thank you.
Yesterday afternoon, an active duty member of of the U.S. Air Force, Aaron Bushnell, set himself on fire in front of the Israeli embassy in Washington in protest against U.S. imperialism's complicity with the war on Gaza. The news of this brave act of self-sacrifice by a single man has powerfully echoed through the hearts of hundreds of millions of men and women. They feel the same profound desperation at the scenes of the genocide being committed in Gaza. Impotence as the collective military might of Western imperialism is used to crush and murder a small oppressed people. They feel the same choking rage at our bloodthirsty capitalist politicians here in the West who have allowed this slaughter. On Thursday morning, 25-year-old cybersecurity and IT engineer for the U.S. Air Force contacted various newspapers stating his intention to lay down his life in protest.
I'm about to engage in an extreme act of protest, but compared to what people have been experiencing in Palestine at the hands of their colonizers, it's not extreme at all. This is what our ruling class has decided will be normal.
Faced with the rank hypocrisy of the imperialists who preach democracy and human rights while arming the murderous Netanyahu regime to the hilt, Bushnell, who is an anarchist, correctly placed the blame squarely where it belongs, with the ruling class. The video of Bushnell's final moments as he approached the gates of the Israeli embassy makes for harrowing viewing. Initially seen on Twitch by just a few dozen viewers, subsequent uploads of the footage have been seen by millions. Even as the flames engulfed his body, Bushnell screams out, "Free Palestine." These were his final words. Alongside this scene of a young man in the prime of his life giving up everything to bring attention to the suffering of the Palestinian people, the video also captured the spectacle of either a plainclothes police officer or a member of embassy security pointing a gun at the dying man, demanding he get on the ground. These actions were not the result of mental illness, but of a deep frustration and anger, the same sentiment which the hearts of millions of workers and youth burn. We are sick of the mass murder and of the lies coming from the capitalist media and politicians in America and everywhere who attempt to blacken the reputations of those standing with Palestine while justifying Israel's slaughter. But Bushnell's message to the world was not simply one of anger. It also showed the desperate, seething need to do something in the face of all this injustice. Faced with the horrors of imperialism, millions feel the need to act. But as individuals, we seem impotent to halt the bone-crushing might of the imperialist juggernaut. A more powerful example of individual protest than that of Aaron Bushnell, who will forever be remembered, cannot be imagined. What is needed now is an organized expression to collect all of this rage into a powerful, invincible force, a revolutionary party that can challenge and overthrow this rotten capitalist system and the whole gang of imperialist war criminals, from Biden to Sunak, Macron, Schultz, Trudeau, each and every one of them. Bushnell's screams of Free Palestine will echo long after his death. What is needed is a volcanic revolution, channeling the righteous anger of the millions who oppose the ceaseless oppression engendered by capitalism and imperialism at home and abroad. Bushnell's protest is the most recent in a long history of self-immolations against imperialist war and oppression. More recently, the self-immolation of Tunisian street vendor Mohamed Bouazizi in 2010 against the grinding poverty and humiliation that he, like millions of others, suffered at the hands of the regime. This acted as the last straw for the revolutionary movement that erupted in Tunisia, ushering in the Arab Spring and the downfall of dictators. Today, the destruction of Gaza is radicalizing millions of people in the Middle East. Regimes throughout the region hang by a thread. The possibility of a new Arab Spring is in the air, terrifying the imperialists. Similar revolutionary developments are on the order of the day all over the world. The question of Gaza has become a key factor in the radicalization of hundreds of millions. The same mood is building everywhere. What is needed is organization and a clear revolutionary program to expropriate the capitalists and carry through a communist revolution. Only this can turn rage and despair into revolutionary hope and a force that will change society. Free Palestine, Intifada until victory, revolution until victory.
Not just here, but the entire country, is that every single bureaucracy is not on the side of the student, but on the side of the Zionists who are literally killing thousands upon thousands of Palestinians day in and day out, while profiting. What needs to be done to end this genocide is, like we've been saying for hours on end, is one solution, revolution. And in order to have that, we must globalize the Intifada.
There is only one solution.
Intifada revolution.
Intifada revolution.
Intifada, Intifada.
Intifada, Intifada.
Globalize the Intifada.
Globalize the Intifada.
What we need is to overthrow U.S. imperialism, build a workers' government, genocide, if you're sick of the oppression from the police, from the military, from every ruling class party, then come join the Revolutionary Communists of America.
Student activists have escalated the Palestine solidarity movement significantly over the past week, establishing encampments at campuses across the country. This kind of escalation is exactly what the movement needed. It's clear to all that Biden and Netanyahu will press on with their genocidal war at all costs, and that we need to take matters into our own hands. In this podcast, we're going to offer our proposals for how we can collectively escalate the movement further. We're going to hear from comrades that are actually on the ground trying to do this. We're going to hear from comrades on the editorial board of The Communist, like Tom Trottier, Bryce Gordon. But first, we're going to hear from Antonio Balmer, the managing editor of The Communist.
The current wave of campus occupations, these Gaza solidarity encampments that we are seeing on universities across the country, represents a new stage in the movement. After nearly 7 months of marches, demonstrations, chanting, demands for a ceasefire, demands for some slowing down of this shipment of arms to Israel to fund this genocide that just keeps killing and killing. It has had zero effect. A lot of people have been asking themselves for a while now, what is it going to take? What is next for the movement? One more demand to shut it down for Palestine, it's not having an effect. Well, now we have a new expression of that. A new answer is being given in practice. Mass action. You know, after months of putting forward this slogan, there is only one solution. Intifada, revolution. Think about what an intifada represents. It's not just a spontaneous mass uprising. It's an explosion of working class coordination. It's a direct action move to collectively take matters into our own hands. It's workers dividing up among themselves in an ingenious way, a division of labor to take society's functions into their hands. We now have a glimpse of that, a concrete step in that direction in these campus occupations. This demand around divestment is something we should look at very carefully, because for a long time that demand has been put forward in an abstract way by middle-class liberal activists who have been appealing to the moral responsibility of corporations to put their money where their mouths is. When they say they represent humanitarian values, it's an appeal to have civic responsibility, to not invest in this brutal occupation, this brutalization of the Palestinians. Corporations don't have morals. They have shareholders. They have marketing strategies. They have naked class interests. You don't get anywhere by appealing to those morals. But this is different. This demand for divestment is not just an appeal to the campus administrations. We know that we're not appealing to the campus presidents. These are just more corporations, by the way. They may be called nonprofit corporations, but these private universities are just fattening their endowments. They're using finance capital. They're making investments. We know that there's money, that there's blood on that money. But we are not appealing to them. We know that we're not appealing to the president of Colombia, who a couple weeks ago was addressing Congress, branding the whole movement as anti-Semitic, slandering it in front of the House of Representatives. We know that we're not appealing to the administration of the University of Southern California that canceled the valedictorian speech because they knew she was going to speak in favor of the Palestinian people against this genocide. Or are we appealing to the president of the University of Texas at Austin, who's texting the senator saying, we need reinforcements, we don't have enough security to put down this group of peaceful demonstrators? The senator is only so happy to oblige. The governor gets on national TV and says every protester deserves to be in prison, that they're all anti-Semitic. They bring in police, riot cops mounted on horses with tear gas, indiscriminately brutalizing students, punching them in the face, dragging them over chain link fences, arresting people just for being at the front of the crowd. Are we appealing to that administration to do the right thing? Are we appealing to the administration of the University of Indiana that recently called for police reinforcements, to have police deployed on the top of the Memorial Union building, snipers with their rifles pointed at these peaceful protesters? Are we appealing to those people? I think the movement is clear. We are not appealing to them. So this call for divestment, this call that says we don't want our tens of thousands of dollars of tuition money to be going toward Israel, is a completely correct demand. We don't want that. But guess what? We don't trust the administrators to shift things. They are actually complicit in this genocide. They've been profiting from it the whole time. Their only concern is to have a quiet end of the semester, and that's why they're hoping that by bringing in the full force of state repression, that they can silence the students. And now it's backfiring because this is only spreading. But we know that we're not appealing on them. This is class struggle. This is taking matters into our own hands. Why should those university administrators, these presidents, these boards of directors, why should they be the ones who control what happens with the money? Why should they be the ones who control the campuses? Why? Because they have a line to the senator and they can deploy the police forces? Is that why? Or is it because they have six-figure salaries and a title that says that they are the administration of the school? Or should the control be exercised by the students who are actually paying the tuition that makes the whole thing funded? Should it be exercised by the teachers, by the faculty, by the campus workers that make the actual campus run? What would a university be without all of those people? It's not the administrators that make the university. The control of the campus should be in the hands of the students, the faculty, the adjuncts, the campus workers. This occupation poses that question. It's a step in that direction. The communists should help everyone understand what the next steps are. That's the question that's being posed, because you need organization. You can't just spontaneously start to occupy and hope that we end up seizing control of this campus. Those presidents should all be dismissed. The boards of directors should all go, all of them. They should all go. They've all forfeited their responsibility, their justification for running these institutions of higher learning. They should be moved out of their offices. And in their place, we should set up a new board of directors that is controlled 1/3 by the faculty and campus workers, 1/3 by the students on the university, and 1/3 by the broader representatives of the working class. You could have representatives of the faculty unions across the country, delegates that are elected by the encampments that are now spreading from coast to coast. You could have a board of directors that makes decisions, that opens up the books, not just calling on them to have transparency, not just calling on them to report about the money, and then they handle it behind closed doors. We should open the books ourselves. These new workers' boards of directors should have control over the accounting. Where is the money going? Make the decisions directly. We need to have workers' control of the campuses. That is where this struggle could go. That is the way to have a class war path forward for this movement. That is what the communists need to be bringing into it. But the campuses, they are an opportunity to begin this action. They've already begun the action. It's on the headlines. The world is seeing it. The example is spreading to campuses around the world. But the strategic sectors of the working class, when it comes to stopping the supply of arms, are not just campus workers. It's not just the students. Our campus occupations are not going to be enough to stop the shipments from going. If U.S. arms stop arriving in Israel, the genocide will come to a halt. They do not have enough to supply this, to continue this on their own. This all relies on U.S. shipments that are coming. They're all being manufactured in the United States. There are tens, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of workers who are involved directly in the various components in the supply chain of the ammunitions, of the fighter jets, of all of the weapons and all of their components, of the drones. Everything that's being sent to Israel to carry out these atrocities are being produced on assembly lines in the United States in front of U.S. workers. They're being shipped in U.S. trucks to ports, to U.S. ports where you have workers who are loading these ships. This is all happening in the hands of the working class. If the working class disrupts any particular point of that supply chain, the whole thing will come to a grinding halt. That is the power of the working class. So it's not just the campuses. How do we link the two? If we get organized in the encampments, if we have general assemblies, a formalized structure to debate, to come to decisions, to elect delegates, democratically select our representatives, select spokespeople to speak to the public, deploy groups of representatives from the encampment to go to these workers, to go to different workplaces, to address the broader labor movement, to make an appeal of solidarity directly from the ground zero of the campus encampments. That is where you can start to have a broader expansion into the class struggle. That is what's needed. The University of Southern California in LA, that campus in downtown LA, could select and deploy a group of agitators to go and talk to the longshore workers and get a statement of solidarity. There are campuses that could do the same thing to workers and to reach out to the broader labor movement in all of its different industries. NYU workers are organized in the United Auto Workers. That leader, Shawn Fain, has come out and said, I am a fighter. Shawn Fain has led a strike in the last period, has made a statement calling for a ceasefire. Shawn Fain, your workers see you as a fighter. You know, you have an entire generation of young people supporting what you're doing in your efforts to organize the unorganized, to go after these unorganized auto plants, to bring the fight into industry. We're supporting what you're doing. You understand, young people support the unions overwhelmingly. Do you support what the youth are doing? When you say you stand for a ceasefire and you see young people actually trying to achieve it, because Joe Biden, Genocide Joe, has done nothing to achieve that result. Do you realize that workers have to take this into our own hands? Do you support this? And if you do, you should mobilize the United Auto Workers from coast to coast in solidarity. The faculty at University of Texas, Austin have come out in support of the students. They've come out in support of the occupation. They have said after seeing the way the administration deployed and brutalized these students that were peacefully gathered to voice their views, they saw this brutal repression and they're standing against it. They said tomorrow, no grading, no classes. We're going to assemble on the main hall. This is the way forward, standing with the students. Those faculty should be invited to become an integral part of the encampment. And the same thing should be replicated on every campus from coast to coast. Bring the faculty in. You need them. The students and the faculty need to work together to seize control of these campuses. We're bringing democratic workers' control of these campuses. We can only do it together. This is also a key for reaching to those broader layers of the working class. You can send delegations of students, but if you have a statement formally on behalf of these unionized workers on the campuses calling for class solidarity from the broader working class, this can help to show this is the way forward. After all, a lot of these workers, the workers in the strategic industries, in the armaments, workers who are living in rural parts of the country, the ruling class is hoping that those workers will keep their heads down, will be so far removed from what's happening in a faraway place that they have no concern. They're there to feed their families, and they are. They're there to get a paycheck. We need to bring the awareness of what's happening to the arms, what's happening to the components going across the assembly lines in front of them. Bring that awareness in class terms to those workers. Those workers know what it means when they see images of civilian parents holding their lifeless children in their arms, the agony on their face. You have no interest in producing arms that lead to that result. You have no interest in enriching a small minority of imperialists who are holding down Israel as an extension of their military power so that they can secure geopolitical influence in that region, access to oil resources. You have no interest in propping that up, and you have the power to stop it. Together we have that power. If we had a systematic campaign bringing these class issues into the workplace, look at the Boeing workers, a company that is squeezing the workers so badly that you now have planes falling apart in the skies because they're cutting corners. The workers want to fight against their exploitation. Boeing is also surely producing some of these components that are going to fund Israel. We can bring these class issues together. You need communists to do that. You need people who understand things in class war terms to do that. We need to organize communist cells in those workplaces. This is the kind of coordination that's needed. This is the reason that you need a mass communist party, hundreds of cells of trained militants, of agitators, of propagandists to bring this message to the shop floor across the country. This is what the Revolutionary Communists of America is attempting to do. We're trying to respond to this moment with it's a very difficult task. It's not going to be easy to build a mass communist party, but we know that we have behind us an entire generation, millions of young people who have had it with capitalism, who are ready to fight, who are ready to take action, who want to bring these horrors of imperialism to an end. We have the numbers. We need organization. That is what's needed. If you want to help carry this message into the movement, do it in an organized way with the Revolutionary Communists of America. We have the forces to make the Intifada more than just a slogan. We can make this a reality in our lifetime, and we can bring about the end of imperialism. The working class has that power. Let's make that a reality.
That was Antonio Balmer. Now we're going to hear from Bryce Gordon and Tom Trottier, who are going to give us some background to this movement and give a little bit more insight as to what communists should be thinking right now and how communists can intervene in the way that Antonio just outlined for us. So first, Tom is going to give a little background to the war currently happening and the class nature of that war.
Just to quickly go over what are the roots of this struggle, we have to remember that we live in what we call the period of imperialism. Imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism, right? And what is imperialism? Imperialism is when you have the domination of monopoly capital. And in these advanced capitalist imperialist countries, they have enormous investments going all around the world. And so they have an intricate military and political system to maintain that worldwide rule so that they can basically, profit, take, enormous profits from the whole entire globe. And this has been going on, of course, for more than 100 years. But if you take a look, for example, the Middle East in particular, the Middle East is a very strategic part of the world. It's militarily strategic. It's strategic in terms of world trade. And it also has a lot of oil, which is, of course, very, very important to the capitalist economy. So from the military, political, strategic point of view, the United States, particularly after World War II, when it became the largest and most powerful world imperialist power, which it continues to be the largest and most powerful world imperialist power today, it wanted to make sure that it had control over that region. So one of the things they did was they utilized the opportunities after World War II, where you had an enormous amount of Jewish refugees caused by the Nazi genocide in Europe. And the United States used this movement of Zionism as a way to create the Israeli Zionist state. They took a place which had been home to two different people, and they basically said, we're going to support one group to take over that area. And of course, they had a criminal partition of that area, and then they supported the Zionists in their goal to expand, which Israel, since it started, has just been expanding. I think we could clearly say that without U.S. imperialism, Zionism wouldn't exist. And of course, through all these decades since the late 1940s, the Zionist state of Israel continues to get aid from the U.S. imperialism, including the latest congressional aid that Biden is signing off on, where additional money for arms and ammunition is going to the Zionist state. So the Zionist state, in oppressing and taking away a homeland for the Palestinian people, has caused enormous suffering, enormous problems. And this, of course, as a byproduct of this oppression, as a byproduct of denying the Palestinians a right to a homeland, this has created constant struggle, constant wars. And of course, the latest war on Gaza is just the latest installment of what has been a tragedy since the late 1940s.
Right, and U.S. imperialism sees Israel correctly as its only remaining reliable ally in the region. And so the interesting thing about this is the U.S. imperialists are aware that their backing for this horrific war is destabilizing both the Middle East, but also domestically. It's causing unprecedented rejection of both parties, of lesser evil voting, and all of these things. And so as people have seen all of the horrific images week after week, month after month for the last since October, people see that 34,000 people have been killed in Gaza, over 1 million have been displaced, and it's turning people against this policy. But U.S. imperialism has to keep funding Israel by virtue of its fundamental class interests. And so, also too, there was a Gallup poll a few weeks ago, which actually showed that for the first time, a majority of Americans now disapprove of Israel's actions, which is up significantly since the beginning of the war, I think by around 20 percentage points. And so it's exposed U.S. capitalism. It's exposed Biden and the Democrats. And of course, the Republicans would be pursuing the exact same policy if they were in power. And it's clear that Biden is worried about this phenomenon, this erosion of his support. He's been giving a bit more cynical lip service to the need for humanitarian aid and the need for a ceasefire and these kinds of things. And yet, behind these rhetorical statements, the Senate just passed a measure to send $17 billion in military aid to Israel, which is a huge amount. I mean, the U.S. sends about $3 billion each year, but they're going to really replenish Israel's stockpiles. Biden is, of course, he's going to okay this, of course. And at the same time, Israel's war aims have still not been achieved. And so the U.S. has to keep greenlighting this genocide, this savage imperialist war, but it's opening up a real rift in U.S. society. And I think this experience is dispelling illusions in the Democrats, but also just in the idea that through merely demonstrating that we can end a war like this, it's becoming increasingly clear that there is no democracy around these kinds of fundamental questions for U.S. capitalism. And I think basically what we see now with the student occupations is that a layer of student activists are realizing that. They're drawing a balance sheet of the past 7 months of all the demonstrations and rallies that have happened in hundreds of cities across the country, and they're realizing that hasn't made a real impact. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, well, you're seeing that the needs of and interests of U.S. imperialism is to maintain Israel and to support them in this vicious war. And yet, by doing this, it's awakening large segments of the American working class, large segments of the American youth to what's going on, the horrors of what's going on. And they're saying that the U.S. government and the U.S. Imperialism is doing these things, and they're doing it, of course, with the taxpayer money, the taxes that they raise from the working class and from the people in this country. And people are saying, we don't want to be part of that. We don't want to be on the side of the oppressor. We don't want to see these people being massacred. I think it's over, the death count now in Gaza is over 33,000. It may have gone up since I last saw it, but that I believe it's something like that. And people are horrified with the way, with what the government is doing. So that helps to create a contradiction, and people start to realize, is that government something that we control, or is it something that functions on its own? And people start to realize that what is called a democratic system, where supposedly you have the rule of the people and the rule of the majority, it's not really that, right? The government is really ruled by these super rich people, the capitalist class, right? The richest 1%, 2%, 3%. They're the people who really run the government. And the government runs in their interest, not in the interest of the majority of the people. So as those contradictions occur, people start becoming aware that that government is not representing them. And that therefore, not only what it's doing in Israel, but maybe even what it's doing in terms of their own domestic lives, they see a contradiction arise. And out of that, people are starting to get outraged. They're starting to fight back. And this is what you're seeing on the campuses with the youth. I mean, it is remarkable, for example, that in spite of all the propaganda for decades in the United States, which tries to paint the picture of Israel as being the victim somehow. In fact, the Zionist state is the oppressor. You know, it's the proxy of U.S. imperialism. But they domestically they've tried to paint it as a victim, and people are becoming aware that no, it's not the victim. It's the cause of the problem. It's not the result of some other oppressive force attacking them. You know, and as people become more and more aware of that, people get outraged by that, and they start to fight back. And this is exactly what you've seen, this change in the public opinion in the United States, where people have realized that they're not going to support Israel anymore. They're not going to support U.S. government support of Israel. You've seen the growth in protests, and then, of course, the most recent protests that have taken place on a number of campuses which is started at Columbia University, but seemed to be spreading to many campuses around the country.
Yeah, they're looking for basically they want to escalate it. They want to make a real dent in Israel's war effort. I think that's what's behind the demand for the universities to divest from companies that work with Israel. People are realizing, well, demonstrations, we voiced ourselves as loudly as we possibly could. That's not changing a thing. How do we actually materially impact Israel's war effort and actually bring the war to a close? And so they're looking to that demand and also to the tactic of occupation instead of mere rallies and demonstrations, which I think we can speak on in just a bit. But we should state, just for the listener, to, again, catch everyone up to speed. As you said, last Thursday, a week ago, this started, or I think actually last Wednesday, 8 days ago, this started at Columbia University. A group of students started basically occupying a section of the campus, putting forth this demand to divest. It's quickly spread to campuses across the country, to places like Yale, Harvard, Emerson College, University of Texas, University of Southern California, University of Minneapolis, and we have comrades on the ground participating and bringing communist ideas to many of these protests. And so it's very significant to see the movement is picking up yet again, despite all the media slander. Of course, Biden has predictably slandered this movement as being anti-Semitic. Greg Abbott, the same, and he actually, speaking of democratic rights being violated, basically said that anyone participating in these protests should just go to jail, should not even have the right to participate in these protests. So the veneer of democracy is being discarded in some cases.
Here's another example of what the ruling class is saying. Mike Johnson, the current Speaker of the House, visited Columbia during this encampment and was met with chants and booing while he tried to spin this as some sort of anti-Semitic protest.
The founders and the great leaders who had come through this institution in the past believed in religious liberty. They believed in democracy. They believed in morality and virtue and the dignity of every human person. They believed in the free exchange of ideas, and they detested mob rule.
To the bourgeois class, even peaceful protests that express the demands of the masses are labeled mob rule.
And shamefully, some professors and faculty have joined the mobs, as Columbia has allowed these lawless agitators and radicals to take over. The virus of anti-Semitism has spread across other campuses. By some counts, as many as 200 universities have a similar form of protest right now.
We should be entirely clear and restate the fact that this movement has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. The reason why these students have shown out in such a force is because of the indignation that they feel seeing thousands and thousands of people being murdered. We just recently found out that over 400 people were found in mass graves in Gaza, at hospitals. Some of the bodies were found with their hands zip-tied behind their backs, and indications that people were buried alive. This is what people are upset about. To try to characterize this as anti-Semitism is a disgusting use of identity politics by the ruling class, so that they don't have to acknowledge the real reason why people have shown out in this way.
But it's not just these student encampments that are happening. There's also employees at Google. 28 employees were fired because they were attempting to occupy an office in protest of their employer's cloud computing contract with Israel. There's been continued demonstrations. There were demonstrators at Scranton, Pennsylvania, during Biden's visit there the last week. And there's clearly widespread support for the movement too. For instance, 3/4 of Columbia students support the call to divest from companies that do business with Israel. And so this really has spread across the country. On the topic of occupations and the role students can and must play in this movement generally, I think if we look at history, we see that students can absolutely play a catalyst role for movements in certain contexts. And in any case, students often serve as a barometer of the mood in society. But the thing is that their position in society doesn't allow them to seriously tackle capitalism. In order to do that, you would need to link up with the working class, which absolutely does have the role in production, the role in society, which by virtue of withholding its labor can shut down capitalism. And so I think as communists, when we participate in these movements, another emphasis we making is that we need to broaden out the scope of the movement, expand, link up with the staff workers, with the faculty, with the workers in nearby industries, and explain that through united action of the working class, it is possible to shut down the war machine, to shut down U.S. imperialism.
We'll be right back with the conversation between Tom and Bryce, but we wanted to switch to a different segment real quick to look more at the topic of how workers can actually end the imperialist war machine. So we have a comrade, Abby Ludlam, who recently did a bunch of research about weapons manufacturing, and she wrote an article called How Can We Actually Stop Imperialism's Genocidal Slaughter? And that's going to be included in issue number 2 of The Communist, which is currently going to print.
The U.S. is by far Israel's largest source of weapons. They provide 68% of all of Israel's arms imports. The U.S. gives $3.8 billion in military aid to Israel every year, and the majority of that goes to purchasing American-made weapons. And actually, just since the beginning of the war in Gaza, the U.S. has approved over 100 military sales to Israel. And all of these weapons are produced in the U.S. by a massive network of millions of workers across the entire country. Just as one example of what that network actually looks like is in the production of the F-35 fighter jets. The Biden administration recently approved the sale of 25 of these jets to Israel. This is one of the most advanced military planes in the world. And these jets are assembled by Lockheed Martin in their facility in Fort Worth, Texas. At this facility, there are over 18,000 workers working on the assembly of these jets. But then beyond those 18,000 workers is an even broader network of people who are producing the raw materials, who are producing the parts that go into the jets, and who are transporting all of these raw materials and parts and transporting the final product to the ports. So in total, there is a network of 240,000 workers across 47 states who are all taking part in producing just this single weapon that is being sent from the U.S. to Israel. And of course, beyond those 240,000 workers are hundreds of thousands, millions more who are producing the rest of the weapons that go to Israel, who are producing the raw materials, the parts, and who are transporting these parts and the final product. And what would really be necessary to shut down the flow of weapons from the U.S. to Israel would be a national coordinated strike across this entire industry, encompassing millions of people. And what would really be needed in order to do that would be coordination, and it would also be political leadership. It would be people who understand what needs to happen, people who understand the power of the working class, the fact that the capitalists are not going to shut down this production voluntarily, and who can communicate to their coworkers that they have the power to shut down production, that they share a common enemy with the Palestinian people, that the same bosses who are exploiting them every day in their workplaces are profiting off of the genocide of Palestinians. In short, basically what would be needed would be communist cells in every single workplace putting forward these ideas, and for these cells to be linked up to each other in a communist party. So that's why we are building a communist party in the U.S. That's why we need a communist party to actually shut down the flow of production to Israel. And that's why the student occupations need to broaden out and connect to those workers who are a part of the production of these weapons in order to actually shut down U.S. imperialism and the flow of weapons from the U.S. to Israel.
I think a lot of people, having seen this, this US-backed genocidal war on Gaza over the past few months, they've come to realize that we need an entirely new system. They've become communists, they've become revolutionaries. What should their task be? What should their political priority be over the next period? And what can we expect from the next period in US politics? Because it's clear the war isn't ending tomorrow. Meanwhile, we have a general election here in the US, which is 2 previous presidents rematching. And so the whole situation is pretty unprecedented. We have the DNC coming up in August, and it looks like there's going to be a large march on the DNC to protest Joe Biden's complicity in the war on Gaza. And so all in all, we're entering an extremely unstable period, it looks like. I mean, speaking of campus occupations, I don't think it's been since the Vietnam War that we saw student occupations at this scale in the United States. So what should be the task of communists? What should be the priority of communists in the coming period to fight to overthrow capitalism and to fight for the cause of the Palestinians?
Well, the communists have been part of this movement from the beginning. We're part of it now, and we're going to continue to be part of it. But what role are we playing? We're playing this very, very important role. We've got to get the message out that we need to build a party. We need to build a communist party that eventually becomes a mass party. Because if we want to get to a workers' government, if we want to end the rule of capitalism, end the dictatorship of a few people over the vast majority, if we want to do that, you need a party. The working class is enormous in this country. It's it's the majority of the vast majority of the population is either working class or part of the working class families. But in order to take power, in order to transform society and end the dictatorship of the few rich people over the majority, in order to do that, it has to be mobilized and organized correctly, and that takes a mass party. So the most serious and dedicated of the youth have to join this effort to build a mass communist party right now. If we build a mass communist party, then we can end all the horrors of capitalism here and abroad. And the bigger the movement gets here in the United States, the bigger the communist movement gets in the United States, the more it will be basically a star leading the rest of the masses around the world, because they're going to look at the U.S. imperialist monster in its own homeland. The people are starting to rise up. The workers are starting to rise up and overthrow this monster here. And there's nothing that we can do more to help the movement abroad than to help to build the Communist Party, the communist movement here in the belly of the beast, so to speak. You know, to all the listeners out there, even if you're not convinced or in full agreement with everything we had to say, if you think what we're saying makes a lot of sense, please reach out to us. Contact the Revolutionary Communists of America. We'd love to sit down and discuss this with you about how we can help to build a real party that will be a real tool for real liberation here and abroad.
So what are the communists doing right now? Well, to answer this question, we actually have a few recordings from comrades on the ground. The first 2 will be in New York, starting with a speech that a comrade did at the Columbia protests. This is Comrade Abit doing a speech right in the heat of things.
56 years ago, at this very university, there was encampments against the Vietnam War, where the students courageously held these encampments, and today, they have to do the exact same thing. And instead of the bureaucracy talking to them peacefully, they call the NYPD to not only assault them, but even suspend these students. These are the same students, by the way, who pay the salaries of every single administrator inside. And the hypocrisy of this bureaucracy has been shown, because everyone remembers a few months ago where Zionists used a chemical weapon against the pro-Palestinians inside. So what this has shown to everyone, not just here, not just in USC, but the entire country, is that every single bureaucracy is not on the side of the students, but on the side of the Zionists, who are literally killing thousands upon thousands upon thousands of Palestinians day in and day out, while profiting of this genocide. This isn't just the bureaucracy of the universities. This is also the Democrats and Republicans, including Eric Adams. And what this has shown to everyone, not just here but globally, is every ruling class party is not on the side of the workers. Not Joe Biden, who's by the way signed over 100 arm deals to fund the genocide. Not Donald Trump. Not a single Democrat, not a single Republican will stop this genocide. That's because U.S. imperialism is the largest backer of Israeli imperialism. So Colombia, yes, must divest from Israeli companies. But also, what needs to be done to end this genocide is, like we've been saying for hours on end, is one solution, revolution. In order to have that, we must globalize the Intifada. Students in there have shown the courage. The dock workers in India and Italy have shown the courage by saying no more arms being sent to Israel, no more funds being sent to Israel. We must have workers' power, students' power, through unity. And to liberate Palestine, capitalism must be overthrown, not just here, but globally as well. What we need, not just here, but globally, is a working class party, is ultimately a revolutionary communist party who's saying no more Democrats, no Republicans, no more the bureaucracy of Colombia has been profiting of the genocide. A party that's for the workers that must say no more genocide, no more profiting off any war, and actually throwing capital in the dustbin of history and saying liberation to the workers, liberation to Palestine, liberation to the world.
Our comrades have been engaging in speeches just like this all over the country with a similar reception. Whenever you connect the movement that's currently going on to the bigger picture, how can students actually play a role in defeating US imperialism? That is something that people don't usually get to hear. That's not a perspective that is commonly outlined. But we don't just do speeches at protests, we also have organized walkouts in New York as well. Not just in New York, but this is a comrade from Pace University who is going to tell us a little bit about their walkout.
We took it upon ourselves to host this walkout because 30,000 Palestinians had died in the hands of the State of Israel and US and world imperialism. And Netanyahu had refused to ceasefire repeatedly and threatened a ground invasion on Rafah, where around 2 million people are stuck. And students are already aware of these facts. They're enraged by these facts, and they're motivated to take actual action, but there's no real leadership worthy for them. So we understood that we had to take immediate responsibility to put forward bolder and more concrete demands and logical class war conclusions. On top of this, there'd been no pro-Palestine activism on campus because nobody was bold enough to do such a thing, even when the majority of the student body was ready to protest. And private universities, even that do have pro-Palestinian activism, are threatened by the Zionist capitalists who fund them because they threaten to pull educational funding if students and faculty stand against the brutal colonization and genocide. So that's when we realized it was really our duty to set forth these demands that are bolder than a ceasefire, to bring to light this fact that in order to end the genocide and the US imperialism responsible for it, we need to have a communist revolution and a workers' government. And in order to have this freedom of speech and freedom to assemble against this genocide, we must expropriate these schools from the capitalists who are profiting from the genocide and paying for our silence. We stood in every single street corner, on top of every table in the school and in the academic buildings, to reach this vast layer of students who are already looking for a serious organization with serious plans to agitate and take a stance at our school. And this brought in countless students, just because of our presence being so bold, and some of which who are now our comrades dedicated to the revolution. And we had a lot of branches dedicated to teaching our aims as communists and how communists can end this genocide. And for instance, like what an intifada looks like, what it is. We made leaflets, we handed them out with our demands while we were giving these agitational speech, and it set forward really our plans for the rally and our plans for the future. The rally itself turned out amazing, and it really showed the RCA's strength, not only in being bold and ready to fight, but being strong and logical in theory and conclusions about how the working class is the only one able to end this genocide through class struggle. Students, faculty members, and others who had just heard about the event started to come to the rally and chant with us. and the moods of everyone there were completely militant and revolutionary. Every single protester eventually shouted proudly that the only solution is a communist revolution. And yeah, as the rally went on, one thing that really helped was the backlash we got. The dean of students, for instance, he threatened to have NYPD make an arrest on us for using a megaphone. Instead of being fearful of this threat, we used it to our advantage. We politicized it. We got these protesters more radicalized against our school. That day was the day that I think our PACE comrades really realized what the RCA's newer tasks are and what our work is going to really look like from this point on. We're going to be the organizers, the organization under which the workers and students can band together to pave the way for a proletarian revolution, the revolution that's necessary to see the end of this genocide and all forms of barbarism.
And of course, we haven't just been involved in this episode of the Palestine Solidarity Movement. We've been doing things for the last few months. And not just in New York either. We had a rally in Minneapolis. You can find videos of this on their Instagram, which I will link in the show notes, but it's pretty awesome to see. You see communists marching with a car at the front with the Comrade, with the loudspeaker, chanting these slogans.
Free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! From Minneapolis to Gaza!
It's also not just speeches and chanting that we're doing. We're actually trying to talk to people about what's happening in Palestine and connecting that to US imperialism and capitalism and the need for a communist party in America. We've been doing this in agitational campaigns just like this one. Our comrades were doing agitation on the New York City train.
Sorry to bother you on your Friday evening, but this week, a young 25-year-old man, Aaron Bushnell, lit himself on fire in front of the Israeli embassy to protest the ongoing genocide in Gaza, where now the death toll of women and children is approaching 30,000. Yesterday, 100 people were injured or killed trying to get food, necessary aid that they needed. The ruling class is unwilling to lift a finger.
What we need to do to combat imperialism is organize the working class. This isn't an issue that can be solved with voting. There's no change that can happen in this country through voting. We are the Revolutionary Communists of America, and we are organizing a party that is up to the task of fighting imperialism and putting an end to genocide in Gaza once and for all.
We are living in a revolutionary epoch. This episode of the Palestine Solidarity Movement is an example of that. Capitalism is continuing to remind us that we're in an era of dramatic reawakening of the class struggle. This is the largest student occupation movement in the United States since the Vietnam War broke out. And we really have to understand the significance of that. If you are trying to get organized, if you agree with us, if you agree with our perspective, or you want to talk to us about it, then you should reach out to us and get organized if you're not organized. There will be links in the description as to how you can do that. If you want to educate yourself, you want to learn what's happening, get updated. We published an article earlier this week called Palestine Solidarity Protests Escalate in Face of Campus Repression. And we also have a few articles in the most recent issue of The Communist. And of course, other episodes of the podcast are good for that as well. And again, the best thing you can do is reach out to get organized right now and actually join the fight to see a free Palestine in our lifetime and the end of US imperialism and the end of capitalism. Join the Revolutionary Communists of America and join the fight for communism.
is whatever the capitalists do to try to mitigate or postpone the crisis ends up turning back on them. It doesn't solve anything. And of course, you know the enormous amount of government subsidies were put in to prop up the economy. And of course, it limped along. You know, they did prevent a certain type of a collapse, a certain vicious collapse. It could have been a lot worse. But then things limped along for a long time after that. We also have, of course, and we discussed this a little bit yesterday, state intervention in Keynesianism as a solution, right? And so, you know, the idea that the government can borrow money, put that money in the economy, stimulate the economy, and that will solve everything. That will smooth over the peaks and valleys of capitalist economic cycle. So the problem with that, and Ted explains this in What Will There Be a Slump? He says is if you want to spend more but you tax more immediately, then what the government's putting in with one hand, it's taking out with the other hand. But if you're borrowing the money, say, okay, I got around it. I just borrowing the money. I'm not raising taxes. I'm not cutting spending. I'm increasing spending. I'm not increasing taxes. But eventually, the money has to be paid back. How do you pay it back? You're either going to have cuts in social spending, cuts in infrastructure spending, raise taxes, or both. What does that do? That does the opposite of what you just did in terms of stimulating the economy. Ultimately, these are not only theoretical arguments against capitalism, they're arguments against the reformists, why these things will not work. And of course, we also know that when the government throws money into an economy, unless you're in a deep slump and things are really going up, usually if the government's just throwing money in without an equal production of new commodities, that leads to inflation. That becomes another problem that they have to deal with. Here's another thing. Some people, some of the reformists, the trade unions will say this, that, if we raise wages, if only we could, this was even said in the Depression, we could just raise wages, people will have more money, and then they'll get the economy going, they'll stimulate. So of course the capitalists would say, yes, all my competitors, they should all raise the wages so those workers can start spending, and it will help get the economy going. The problem is, you know, when you get the capitalists in a circle, right, it's a circular firing squad, I guess, to a certain degree, and they say, well, you first, you know, nobody wants to be first, nobody wants to do it. And in fact, if they raise wages, how does that affect things? Well, remember, when the capitalists invest, they're investing in constant capital and variable capital. So if you're given a certain quantity of constant capital and variable capital, if you raise the wages, what does that do? That means you have to put more money in, and it doesn't increase your surplus value, so your rate of profit goes down. So why would a capitalist want to invest when his rate of profits go down? Another factor of investment is capitalists, the secret, don't tell anyone, capitalists want to get the biggest return possible. Okay, and if they have a choice, if they say, if I invest here, I get 1% back. I invest here, I get 10% back. I invest here, I get 20% back. Guess which one they're going to invest in, right? Of course, there's a risk-return thing. We know that. But that is a factor in what they do. But here's another thing. This also leads to this point of the tendency of the rate of profit default. Now, I'm not going to go into that in detail unless there's some questions we could discuss it. But basically, we reject this idea that some academic Marxists have, that the tendency of the rate of profit default is a magical formula that can predict when a slump will happen and how long the slump will last. And, you know, that's a lot of craziness. What Marx was looking at was he's just saying there's a historical trend that if you look at over time, as capitalists are investing and competing against each other, and they're trying to increase the productivity of labor, so they're going to get more machines and, you know, AI or whatever to try to reduce the amount of labor. As they do that, what happens is the amount that they invest in constant capital, the amount they invest in variable capital, the proportion shifts towards constant capital. As a result, the surplus, if you look at the ratio of the surplus value over that total investment of constant and variable capital, that starts to go down. The rate of profit goes down. And then there's a question that either there's two things you can draw from that. First of all, the capitalist says, well, if the rate of profit's going down in this business, I'm not going to invest in this business. I'm going to invest in something else. I'm going to speculate the money on in Las Vegas or whatever. He's going to look for another way to make his money. That's one issue. Another issue is to do counterattacks against the working class. to try to drop wages and benefits. So in actual fact, the pressure is not on the capitalists to raise the wages. The pressure is on the capitalists to drop the wages. So that the actual material reality works against the suggestion that if you just raise wages, that's going to solve the contradictions of capitalism. By the way, when faced with rising wages, there are two things the capitalists can do, and they do both, right? But this idea that, some people say, you don't need a socialist revolution. All you need is unionization. Even the labor notes crowd, some of whom claim to be communists, right? They say, all we have to do is increase union density. Imagine if we had 90% of the industry unionized. The power of that union, they would raise the wages. Everything would be fine. Their theory, this is a typical reforms, right? Their theory is we can make life under capitalism pretty good. And socialism will be even better plus, but we can make life. That's ridiculous. You can't do that. And I'm going to explain why. Because there's two things the capitalists can do. One thing is they can invest in more machinery, eliminate jobs, so you have that greater concentration into constant capital. But another thing is they can move production elsewhere. They can move production to a country which doesn't have the same level of wages and benefits than does the, let's say, the advanced capitalist country with all its unionization. And I'm going to give a concrete example of something. The garment district was noted for having all these sweatshops and tough working conditions. But you know what? They got the unions in. It was actually heavily unionized. So they got some gains in terms of working conditions, wages and benefits. Oh, wonderful. How did that work out for the garment workers? Well, I moved to New York in 1982, but I found this figure from 1984. In 1984, you had 202,000 employees in the garment district, garment industry. Some of them were in Chinatown, but most of it was here. 202,000, that's a pretty big workforce. And like I said, when I would come in those days, walk up 7th Avenue, you'd see them that have these rollers and then have all the shirts on there, the pants. And it was also some great lunch places, but that's another story. Those places are also gone. But 202,000 employees in 1984 in the garment district. How did they get rid of those unionized employees? They moved it overseas, right? The garments are made in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, Indonesia, wherever they could make it much cheaper. Today, in 2024, 40 years later, the total amount of employees in the garment industry in New York City, only 18,500. Very, very small, very, very small. So this idea that just simply unionizing the workforce and raising wages, that this is going to solve the problem. We don't need a socialist revolution. Just need a union, strong union density. Well, they had union density, and what happened to those workers in that industry? But what I want to say is the ruling class in the present situation, I think Trump, on some level, he understands at least this. He doesn't. I don't think he understands the problem is capitalism. That I don't think. I don't think he even understands how capitalism works or anything like that. He himself, by the way, was a very poor businessman. He made his money the old-fashioned way. He inherited it, right? His father actually built a business of residential apartments. He built a whole bunch of buildings in Brooklyn. He basically inherited that money. But he's mainly made money to the extent he's made it through entertainment and stuff like that. But I think one thing he does understand is the economy is not where he wants it. Thank you. The economy is not where he wants it. And there's one thing I think it's clear. I think somebody read it. I don't know if it was Antonio. Someone read it yesterday about Trump and how he kind of channels this postmodernism. He really believes that reality should reflect his wishes and desires, right? He really believes that. It's not about dealing with the real world as it is. This is the way I want it, so this is the way it is, right? He surrounds himself with yes men. You saw that cabinet meeting, like they're all fawning on him. Oh, the great leader, and the sun was out and it was shiny because of you, today, and all that. That's he gets some bad news from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and he fired the person he had put in there earlier in the year. He said the other day, the Bureau of Labor Statistics is going to release statistics. Don't believe it. It's just he knows that these things are not to his liking. So he's trying to take more control over things, We see that with the Federal Reserve and stuff. But for example, whatever power he takes, this is not going to solve the problem. America is not exceptional. He may think it is. It's not exceptional. The American capitalism functions according to the laws of world capitalism, of all capitalism. And there's nothing he can do to fix this system. This system is going down. But what I would say is that some of the things he's doing, I think, are going to be adding to the crisis of American capitalism and adding to the crisis of world capitalism. Because it's true, a lot of the institutions that the bourgeois, the liberal establishment built in the post-war period allowed them to have a certain expansion, allowed them to have a certain power in the world. And by knocking that down, that doesn't solve the problem either. Maintaining those things is impossible. Knocking them down doesn't solve the problem either. It can lead to other problems for them. And I just wanted to read extensively from this article because I thought it was quite interesting about some of the crisis that just comes about by threatening the institutions that the bourgeois have been leaning on in the past. It says, taken together, Trump administration's efforts to expand its influence into spheres that were once insulated from political meddling pose a larger threat, potentially undermining the United States' previously unshakable reputation as a reliable, predictable place to do business. These are all real components of why people would trust the United States. And if you start taking them apart, you start eroding that trust, said Norbert Michael, an economist at the Cato Institute, which, by the way, is a libertarian think tank. At some point, you're no longer the thing that gives people confidence. You're just another third world country. I'm sure Trump's not going to like that, right? Then he says, there's another quote here by Darren Acemoglu. He says, every part of the United States' success, such as it is, the United States as an innovation hub, the United States is a place where people bring their money for safety. Those have all been rooted in some sort of belief and some sort of reality. I like the way he put it, some sort of reality of U.S. courts and U.S. agencies functioning well, said Darren Acemoglu, an economist at MIT who won a Nobel Prize last year for his research on the importance of institutions to economic growth. The United States rebounded from the pandemic-induced recession of 2020 and the inflation crisis that followed much more quickly than most European nations or other similarly advanced economies. Mr. Acemoglu noted the same was true after the global financial crisis of 2008. In both cases, he said, the strong recovery was partly the result of the U.S. economy's reputation as a safe haven, attracting investors willing to lend the federal government money in the form of treasury bonds at low interest rates. That willingness depends on confidence in the long-term reliability of the federal government and its institutions. The fact that the U.S. has done so much better than European countries in the last two crises, the financial meltdown of 2008 and COVID, is all because of that, Mr. Acemoglu said. The U.S. was able to have more credible monetary policy, and the U.S. was able to use fiscal policy more effectively during both of them. The pieces are interdependent. Investors are willing to lend to the U.S. government because they trust that the Fed will keep inflation under control and won't succumb to political pressure to pump money into the economy to allow further government spending. The Fed, in turn, bases bases interest rates on economic data that policymakers trust to be free of political influence. Good economic data is a bedrock of good policy, said Donald Kahn, who served as vice chair of the Fed during the 2008 financial crisis. All those pieces are now being threatened. This is the final part. But history suggests that fiscal crises are rarely obvious until they are well underway, when they may be impossible to stop. Mr. Michael of the Cato Institute recalled the old line about bankruptcy, that occurs slowly and then all at once. This is his quote, the most likely scenario is that you just start seeing things get chipped away, and then eventually it just kind of blows up, he said. Eventually it's too much and the right domino falls and it's not something you can control. Exactly. Capitalism is not under the control of the capitalists. That's the fundamental problem. MCM. It's independent of MCM prime. It's independent. U.S. imperialism, the fact is, we discussed this also yesterday in the perspective, we'll have less room, not more room to maneuver. The economic crisis, frankly, is going to put the last nail in the political coffin of Trump of MAGA. And of course, if it brings the Democrats back, it's going to put the nail in their coffin. This is not going to be a wonderful situation for the capitalists. It's not going to be a wonderful situation to live through. But it will undermine all of them. It's going to undermine the social and political confidence that people have in the system, which has already been greatly undermined. It's going to create tremendous opportunity. Now, revolution is inevitable, but the victory of the revolution is not inevitable. We need to build that party. The opportunities are never better than they are today, and they will become even better in the future for us to build. But that takes real work. So, comrades, I think if we start with a basic theoretical understanding of how the system works, why it's in a dead end, and what we can do to build a party to lead the working class to victory. If we do that and we work hard, we'll get there.
Welcome to Communists of America. Today we're going to be talking about the assassination of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson and the suspect of that killing, Luigi Mangione. We want to say right off the bat that this is all alleged. We don't know whether or not Luigi did it, and we're not really going to talk about that, but we are going to talk about Luigi as being a center of this case and the support that he has gotten for being at the center of it. And we do want to say that if you do support Luigi, definitely hit the join link below to get organized to build a revolutionary party and harness the energy that you share with a lot of people. We have Charlotte Papin, who wrote an article about Luigi and mass consciousness. So what is the mood towards Luigi as far as what do the masses think about this killing and Luigi?
There's been a lot of an outpouring of support for Luigi on social media, and I think it's been a topic of discussion amongst people's friends at their workplaces, in their classrooms. There was a New York Times opinion piece written that was called "The Rage and Glee That Followed a CEO's Killing Should Ring All Alarm Bells." And this journalist said that, quote, "I've been studying social media for a long time, and I can't think of any other incident when a murder in this country has been so openly celebrated." But I think it's very clear why there's been this reaction and this outpouring of support. In another poll, more than 2/3 of people who responded said that they believed denials of coverage and the profits of the healthcare industry were at least partially responsible for the killing.
I hate to say his name on the podcast, but Ben Shapiro found out the hard way that this is not a left-right divide issue. He made a video called "The Evil Revolutionary Left Cheers Murder." And a lot of the people in his fan base, in the comments, actually, if you look at the comments, said this is not a left issue, it's everybody. His audience as well didn't really have sympathy for Brian Thompson and his assassination.
Exactly. It's not a left-right issue. And to quantify it a little bit, a YouGov poll revealed that 39% of adults under 30 view Luigi favorably. That's a huge section of the youth in particular, but there's a support for him across a wide age range and also across the political spectrum. This is not a Democrat-Republican issue. It's a class issue.
Both parties are the party of Brian Thompson. Donald Trump, right after the killing, said that
was a terrible thing. It was cold-blooded, just a cold-blooded, horrible killing. And how people can like this guy is... that's a sickness, actually.
And this is across both of the ruling class parties. Tim Walz, I think he tweeted something like, "Brian Thompson was a valuable part of the healthcare community." I mean, basically the entire ruling class has closed ranks in order to condemn the shooting of Brian Thompson, and call Luigi a terrorist and all of these things. Luigi is facing federal charges of murder with a firearm, stalking, and state charges that he's pled not guilty to of terrorism and first-degree murder. He faces the possibility of a life sentence without parole if convicted, And I believe the federal charges carry the possibility of the death penalty. And it's not just him. A working class Florida mother of 3 was denied insurance by her provider. And on the phone, she ended the call saying, delay, deny, depose, you people are next. You know, this is a desperate person who has just been denied insurance. And now for just saying those words, she's facing 15 years in prison.
Yeah, this reaction from the ruling class is actually radicalizing a lot of people who consider themselves on the right, maybe. We have a comrade in Tennessee who said that their brother, who's an active duty Marine, was a Trump voter, was an Elon Musk fan. Because of this killing became a Luigi supporter. And because of the reaction from the ruling class, people like Trump, people like Elon Musk, now this person who was a Trump voter adopted the communist label and said that their brother is posting social media posts that have the Internationale in the background of them. So I think that that's radicalizing people. And I think an even bigger layer of people is radicalized because of the hypocrisy. The same ruling class that is reacting against this killing is also killing people all over the world.
All of this stuff about condemning violence and stuff is coming from the same class of people that are sending billions to Israel to fund the slaughter of the Palestinian people. I mean, the Israeli state, for months telling the Palestinian people one place is safe, to go to it, move there, and then bomb it, and then say another place is safe, go there, and then bomb it again. That's mass terrorism. They have absolutely no ground to stand on. They condemn violence in general, but there's blood all over their hands. They are doing that abroad, while inside of the United States, if you look at data from the American Journal of Public Health, you can estimate that 7,100 Americans died from a lack of health care in the time between the shooting of Brian Thompson and I think early February. It's completely hypocritical. The U.S. healthcare industry is particularly brutal and exploitative, and it touches almost every single American workers' lives. There was some research done on this recently that said 18% of insured adults said that they'd experienced a claim denial in the last 12 months. That's a huge chunk of the adult population. Across all medical insurance companies, 1 in 5 claims were denied. And what does that mean? That means that people don't get access to the healthcare that they desperately need. In some cases, people dying due to lack of access to healthcare. Or even if you're able to get care, then a lot of people end up in crushing medical debt. 1 in 12 adults in the United States have medical debt. But if you take into account healthcare debt that is on credit cards or owed to family.
Same time tomorrow, comrade.